Well, I have good news for you today. And the good news today is about the empty grave clothes. We've been doing a series on the emptiness of Easter. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about the cross, the empty cross. Last week, we talked about the empty tomb. And today, we're talking about the empty grave clothes. We'd like to invite you to take your clickers. And right at the beginning, because we're going to use them a couple times more, right at the beginning, we want to ask you about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. How do you feel about the resurrection of Christ? Was Christ raised? Absolutely, you have no question about it. He was raised from the dead. Or most likely, B, he was raised from the dead. Not sure. You have some doubts about it. No, he wasn't raised. That whole thing's just a big hoax. Or maybe you have another answer. So we'd like to give you 15 seconds to answer either A, B, C, D, or E. And you can begin right now, but you need to turn on your clicker. Make sure the blue light is on, and the 15 seconds begins now. Absolutely, most likely, not sure, no, or other. And looks like 111 of you indicated an answer, and here's what you said. 99 of you said absolutely, he was raised from the dead. 5 of you said most likely he was raised from the dead. 3 of you aren't sure. 2 of you said the whole thing is a hoax, and 2 of you have another answer that isn't on the screen. So overwhelmingly, we are believers, and I think that's why we are here today. Now, as we think about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we would probably do well to just kind of go back over the history that we have as we think of the empty grave clothes. How did that all happen? Well, Rembrandt painted this picture, and of course Rembrandt is not historically accurate here because he actually has a loincloth on Jesus Christ, and we know that the Romans actually crucified people when they were naked. They stripped them naked. That was part of the punishment, is to humiliate them in front of others. So we know that Christ was put on the cross. He was naked, and notice on this cross that Rembrandt painted, it is a capital T cross. We talked about that a few weeks ago at church. Well, afterwards, you know the story. He was on the cross, he died, and afterwards Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple of Jesus because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. It's interesting that the Bible tells us here that he was a secret disciple. In fact, we know that 2 men came for the body of Jesus, Nicodemus along with Joseph of Arimathea. And both of those guys were in the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin met to judge Jesus. And either they kept their mouths shut, they were there and they didn't say anything, they didn't object to the sentence that was pronounced, or they didn't show up for the meeting. They were like many of our congressmen and congresswomen. They just decided not to go. Either way, it was kind of a cowardly thing to do. But secretly, these guys were disciples of Jesus Christ. But now, that all changes. After he dies, suddenly they have a change of heart, and they actually come forward and express their faith in Jesus Christ. It was no easy thing to take down a body from the cross, especially one that the individual had died so quickly, because often someone might be on the cross for a long period of time, perhaps days, rare occasions, maybe even longer. But in those cases, what would happen is that eventually the flesh would deteriorate and the person would fall off of the cross onto the ground, and the birds and the dogs and other varmints would take care of the body. But in Jesus' case, he died after a period of about 6 hours on the cross. So what we find is that they need to take him down, and they would have had to got a ladder. They would have gotten a ladder, and they would have had to climb up, and they'd have to take the nails out of the hands and out of the feet. And it was a big deal. It may have taken several people to get him off of the cross. And again, it was the naked body of Christ that they were taking off of the cross. And so Joseph of Arimathea was given permission to take the body down, and he was going to place Christ in the cross, or rather in the tomb that he had actually purchased for himself. The Bible tells us in John 19, verses 39 and 40, that Nicodemus also came with about 75 pounds of spices made from myrrh and aloes. The two men wrapped the body in a linen cloth together with spices, which was how the Jewish people buried their dead. So you can see these two guys, and no doubt there was a larger group than that, but the two guys are mentioned specifically. They come and they get the body of Jesus, and they came with 75 pounds of spices. Wow, 75 pounds. That was a lot of spices, but these were rich guys. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, they were wealthy. And they came with all of this aloes and myrrh, and they were going to wrap the body in a linen cloth. Now, the linen cloth, actually the original says strips of linen. So it was not one single linen cloth, but it was strips of linen. Now, wealthy Nicodemus may have had servants carry the 75 pounds of dried myrrh and aloes in boxes, and they may have also washed Christ's body. It was very customary. I mean, it was the thing to do, that when you buried someone, ceremonially you would wash them. So they took off of the cross the naked body of Christ, they washed it, and then they had 75 pounds of dried spices. And they would use these dried spices to soak up the blood that was associated with the death of Christ. And they probably had smaller boxes. We didn't have one 75-pound box, but they probably had multiple boxes and multiple servants, and they came, got the body of Christ, and opened the boxes and prepared his body for burial. So that's how that all took place. Now, some of you have heard, maybe all of you have heard, about the Shroud of Turin. This is a shroud that some people have claimed to be the actual linen cloth that Christ was placed in. And DNA evidence has shown that it was not. It's 14 feet by about 3.5 feet, and it dates back to about the 1300s. So we know that he was dressed in, or he was prepared for death and burial by linen strips of cloth, not one large cloth. And this could not have possibly been the cloth, because it's just simply not old enough. Should Adventist Christians do Easter? What do you think? You have your clickers. A, no. Adventists shouldn't celebrate Easter because it's pagan. No, shouldn't celebrate Easter because it's Catholic. Or C, yes, and they should do it in a big way.